On my 81st birthday, they burned down my house. The moment the flames erupted, I knew right away it wasn't an accident. It was too perfect, too well timed. The fire started just after everyone had left, leaving me all alone in the house. Showed up too quickly, wearing those concerned faces, ready with their so-called solutions. But I didn't let on, just stood there, watching the house where I had lived for almost 6 decades turn to ashes. I nodded at their fake sympathy, their half-hearted words. "Mom, don't worry. We'll figure it out," G said, standing beside me and putting a heavy arm around my shoulders. His hand felt too weighty, and that was when I remembered I'd always known he was a bad actor. That morning had started like any other. I woke up early, just as I had done for decades. As an accountant, it was a habit I had long since gotten used to. I made myself a cup of coffee, strong and bitter. Just like Logan had always joked it would be strong and bitter just like me. He was probably right. I glanced out the window at my garden, the lilacs Logan and I had planted when we first moved into the house. Those lilacs had grown tall now, hiding part of the old wooden fence. They were all that remained of him, aside from the land, of course. The kids were supposed to arrive at 5 in the evening. I knew they wouldn't forget. Winona, G's wife, never missed an opportunity to show off how thoughtful she was. I often wondered if she practiced those perfect smiles in front of the mirror or if they came naturally. I made dinner, washed the dishes, and settled into my favorite chair with a book. The day passed slowly, quietly as most days had since I retired. At 4:30, G and Winona arrived. It was a little heavier now, his hair thinning, and his shirt no longer fit over his stomach. Beer and chips at night hadn't been kind to him. Winona, on the other hand, looked flawless, her hair perfectly styled and that same forced smile. I often wondered which was more expensive, her hairstyle or my entire monthly pension. "Happy birthday, Mom," G said, handing me a bouquet and a box of chocolates. Lilies. He knew very well I couldn't stand them. "Hope everything's okay." "With you," Winona added, her eyes scanning the living room with a critical gaze. I knew what she was doing. She was looking for signs of senility, signs that I couldn't take care of myself. She was wasting her time. At 81, my mind was still sharper than most people half my age, and certainly sharper than that school administrator, who thought she was the epitome of a businesswoman. Soon enough, Aubrey, my daughter, arrived with her husband. Zephyr, always the loud one, burst into the room laughing at some joke only he found funny. He filled the space with his presence, like a typical car salesman, lots of noise, but little substance. Aubrey, though, looked tired. She had just finished a shift at the hospital, but there was something odd in her eyes, a strange gleam. I'd seen that look before when she lied to me about breaking a vase when she was a child. Then the grandchildren showed up. Late as usual. Marlo Gar's daughter couldn't take her eyes off her phone. Thornton, Aubrey's son, had a new expensive watch on his wrist. I didn't need to ask where it came from. It was clear enough. Like father, like son, we sat down to eat. I cut the cake Aubrey had brought. It was store-bought, with that sickly sweet frosting no one really enjoyed. There hadn't been time to bake, of course. "Grandma, aren't you afraid to live alone in such a big house?" Marlo asked, never looking up from her screen. "Why should I be afraid?" I replied, cutting a piece of cake. At my age, nothing scares me anymore. I wasn't about to tell her about Logan's old gun, still tucked away in my nightstand, a real family heirloom. But that's a secret for another time. "But Mom, it's getting dangerous," Aubrey said, concern lacing her voice. "Remember how you fell in the bathroom last month?" I remembered, of course. A little dizzy, a few bruises, nothing to make a fuss over. But they made it sound like a catastrophe. They'd been talking about it for weeks, ever since Zephyr lost his job for the 3rd time that year. G had started talking about expanding their house. "Many of our friends and elderly relatives have already moved to Quiet Harbor," he said, glancing at Winona. "They say it's very nice there, Quiet Harbor. A nursing home, 10 miles from my house. Newly built with manicured lawns and intrusive advertising. Expensive too. I wondered who would be paying for it. I suppose my home insurance, I muttered, not looking up from my plate. But I'm not old enough for that place yet. The conversation shifted after that. Zephyr boasted about some new deal he'd made. Winona complained about the school principal. The grandchildren, predictably, barely said a word. Around 8 o'clock, they decided to leave. "Mom, are you sure you don't need help with the cleaning?" Aubrey asked, pulling on her coat. "I'll be fine," I replied, smiling. "Go on, it's getting dark." When they were gone, I slowly cleared the table, turned off the lights, and headed upstairs to my bedroom. A wave of exhaustion hit me, and I decided to lie down for a quick nap. But it wasn't long before I was jolted awake by the harsh, acrid smell of smoke. Smoke was creeping under the door. Oddly, the fire alarm didn't go off. I had checked it just a month ago. Panic didn't set in right away. I moved quickly, throwing on my robe, grabbing my bag with my important papers-old habits from my life, with Logan Ann climbing out the window. My hands found the trellis, guiding me down the old wooden structure, a path I knew well. Long ago, I had used it to sneak out when I was young. The flames were already spreading. It was no accident. Logan, when my parents forbade us to see each other by the time the fire department arrived, the flames had engulfed the entire first floor. I stood on the lawn in my nightgown and robe, clutching my bag of documents. Then Boris called not only the fire department, but also an ambulance, and my children at least, I managed to grab my bag. It contained not only my personal documents, but also the keys to the safe deposit box. Where? I kept the papers. Fourth Land in Myanmar G was the first to arrive, followed by Aubrey. They pretended OB. Shocked and horrified, but something in their eyes betrayed their relief. Well, I can understand them, an old mother with a big house and the land it stands on. It's convenient when all that passes to you. And you don't have to wait years for your inheritance. Mom, how did this happen? Aubrey hugged me, but her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from excitement looks. Like a short-circuit fireman said to G. Not to me, as if I were already incapacitated wiring in old houses, soft and dangerous old wiring. In a house where I had completely replaced the electrical system. 3 years ago, I wanted to argue, but bit my tongue in time. Better let them think. I don't suspect anything, Logan always said. Iris, the hardest blow is the one you don't expect. By morning, all that was left of my house was a charred shell. That children offered to let me stay with them, but almost immediately came up with the idea of a nursing home, Mom. It's thinly temporary until we decide what to do with the house, assured. Me, you'll be comfortable and safe there. I've already made arrangements. They're ready to take. You in today? Winona added, Nodovan, trying to hide her enthusiasm. Wow, she arranged it so quickly it was as if she had Khaled ahead. I looked at their faces and remembered Logan's words, never show your cards before it's time. Iris, let them think you're weaker than you really are. Okay. I said finally, if you think it's best. They didn't hide their relief. By evening, I was sitting in a small Buckleon room. At the quiet harbor with a view of a well-kept garden, the children brought me a suitcase with things they had hurriedly bought at the nearest store. All new, faceless, not mine. Well, visit you every weekend. Aubrey promised kissing me goodbye. I nodded. Anne smiled, but a plan was already forming in my head. Logan had taught me never to forgive betrayal, and if anyone knew the price of land, it was him, my first husband. Logan Wastel was not the kind off man who was invited to dinner parties in the respectable homes of Myanmar to the public. He was a successful businessman with interest in real estate. To those who knew him better, he was the man to call when you needed a problem solved without attracting the attention of the police. I met him when I was 19 and he was 25. He noticed me on the beach, walked over and said, "You look like a woman who can keep secrets." I didn't realize then, now, right? Our marriage lasted 7 years during that time. I learned more about life than I ever wanted to. No, I learned how to keep 2 sets of books, recognize lies from the slightest facial movements, and keep secrets when Logan died at 32 officially in a car accident, though I knew the truth. I was left a widow with an unexpected inheritance land covering. Several blocks in the private sector of Myaramar, the land was registered to a shell company called Vastal, properties whose connection to me was known only to a few trusted lawyers by that time. I was already working as an accountant for Thessaly, and had carefully built a reputation as a modest, reliable woman. 3 years later, I met Edward Madley, a decent widower with a young son. G. married, and I gave birth to his daughter Aubrey. Edward never knew about my first husband or the land I owned. To him, I was just Iris, an accountant from a good family, Edward and T. I lived happily together for 26 years until he died of a heart attack. All that time, I quietly managed my land assets through proxies, gradually raising rents for everyone except the neighborhoods where my grown children had built their homes. I made special arrangements for them through Wazel Properties. They got long-term leases at a symbolic price, unaware of who the real owner of the land was, and now they've burned down my house and left me in a nursing home, thinking of gotten rid of a burden. They don't know that I hold their lives in my hands. All I have to do is snap my fingers and the ground will disappear from under their feet. Literally, I sat by the window in Quiet Harbor and watched the sunset. A strange feeling of peace came over me, perhaps for the first time in many years. I felt alive again. I had a purpose. Logan would have been pleased. My first morning at the nursing home began with a loud knock on the door. I hadn't even fully woken up yet when a young woman in a light blue uniform entered the room. "Good morning, Mrs. Vattel. My name is Linda. I'm your morning caregiver. How did you sleep? Let me help you get ready for breakfast." Without waiting for an answer, she threw open the curtains. Sunlight flooded the room, revealing its blandness. A standard bed, a nightstand, a dresser, and an armchair by the window. Even the bedding was perfectly neutral. No patterns, no colors, just pale blue like Linda's uniform. "I can get dressed on my own," I said, sitting up on the bed. Linda smiled with that special indulgence young people reserve for the elderly. "Of course you can, but I'll stay nearby in case you need any help." Refusing to argue further, I pulled on one of the new outfits my children had bought me, a tasteless blue pantsuit that I would never have chosen myself. Linda nodded approvingly, as if I were a child who had accomplished her first independent task, and led me to the dining room. The drawing room was a spacious room with large windows and many round tables. Despite the early hour, most of them were already occupied. The residents of Quiet Harbor were early risers. "Mrs. Vattel, I'll seat you at Merholt's table," Linda said, leading me to a table by the window, where an elderly man with impressive gray sideburns was sitting. "Mr. Holt, this is Mrs. Wellel, our newcomer." The man looked up from his plate and gave me a penetrating glance. His face was wrinkled and tanned, and his shawls betrayed a man accustomed to physical labor. "Halt," he said, nodding. "Sit down, Mrs. Well. The food here is decent, if you don't mind, Iris." I sighed, sitting down, and I'm not picky about food. Breakfast was actually quite edibly meal: toast, eggs, and fruit. I noticed that Wobble was methodically dividing the food on his plate, as if marking out sections of a field. "Were you a farmer?" I asked, pointing to his plate. He reset his eyebrows in surprise. 50 years on the land. You're observant. I'm an accountant. I'm used to noticing details." Webley chuckled and went back to his food, but I noticed a new interest in his eyes. After breakfast, we were given a tour of the property. Linda showed the newcomers, me and two other women who had arrived the day before, around every nook and cranny of Quiet Harbor. I have to admit, the place was well laid out. There was a spacious garden with walking paths, a library, a recreation room with a TV and board games, and even a small pool for water aerobics. The staff was polite and seemed to genuinely care about the residents. No thought I was planning on staying here for long, but still, at the end of the tour, the director of the home, Mrs. Palmer, a dignified lady in her 50s, personally introduced herself to each newcomer. "Mervitel, I hope you'll like it here," she said, with a professional smile. "Your family was so concerned about your well-being after that terrible fire." "I'm sure they were," I replied, smiling back. "They're always very caring, especially when it comes to my insurance," I thought, but kept it to myself. That evening, Maubrey called to see how I was settling in. The conversation was short and awkward. She avoided looking at me through the phone screen, even when she assured me that she and G were working on the insurance and would visit me. "You okay, Mom?" she asked at the end. Her concern poorly concealed. "Fine," I replied. "It's very nice here. I even have a new friend, Mr. Holt, a former farmer." "Oh, that's wonderful," Aubrey said clearly. "Delighted, so you like it. There, Im. So happy for you." Too happy in my opinion. I said goodbye, promising to Calf next day, and hung up then. I took a small notebook with a worn leather cover out of my bag, Logan's gift for our first anniversary. Write everything down. Iris memory fails, but paper endures. I started the list. First, insurance. My house was insured for a decent amount, including contents. Who would get the payout according to the documents? Me, of course. About. It was obvious that the children would expect to have a say in how the money was spent. Second, the land, the plot in which the house stood, and all the land around it were part of the neighborhood. I had inherited from Logan, who had the right to dispose of this land, only me, and if the children tried to sell or build on the plot without acknowledge. 3 days later, I had settled into Quiet Harbor so well that I was no longer accompanied at every turn I knew. Staff scheduled the names of most of the residents and, most importantly, the location of the office with a phone that could be used for personal calls. My first call was to Marcus Fielding, the lawyer who had handled my land affairs since Logan's death. He was over 70, but he had no intention of retiring. Mers whistle. His voice sounded surprised. "I've been trying to reach you since I heard about the fire. I'm in a nursing home, Marcus. The Quiet Harbor." I see. He paused. "Did your children put you there? That's right. And I suspect the fire was no accident." Marcus didn't express surprise. He had seen enough. "Over the years working with Logan, what do you want me to docket? If there have been any attempts to collect insurance or change anything in the HL documents, and find out what financial situation my children are in. I'm particularly interested in any debts." "I'll do that, Mrs. Wello, and be careful." My second call was to Rita Saunders, former colleague from the city council who now worked for the fire department. "Iris, my God. I heard about your house. Are you okay as I can be, Rita? Listen. I need a favor. Can you take a look at the report on the fire at my house? Something doesn't add up." Rita was silent for a moment. "That's a little outside my protocol, Iris. Remember how I helped you with the paperwork when you were almost accused of embezzlement? I didn't like to remind people of past favors, but the situation called for it." "All right, Reed. I'll see what I can find, but no promises." The third call was the most difficult. I dialed the number of Jenkins, a former police officer who had once worked for Logan. He was very old, but his mind was still sharp, and he had kept his connections. "Mrs. Well," his voice sounded wary. "It's been a long time. Yes, Jenkins, in need your help. I've been retired for 10 years. But your contacts are still goody." "Sure." He paused. "What do you need information about my children? G. Madley and Aubrey Kensington. Their finances. Debts. Contacts. I'm particular orienters in the last few months. They're your children, Mrs. Wello, and they may have burned down my house to collect the insurance and get rid of me. Jenkins, you're just like your late husband." "All right, I'll see what I can do while waiting for information." I spent my time observing life in Quiet Harbor. Webby Holt turned out to be an interesting cantuation. He didn't like small talk and only spoke when he had something to say, which suited me just fine. "My son visits me every week," he said one day over lunch. "Fergus is a good boy, hard work." "What does he do?" I asked out of politeness. "He sells farm products. He wants to open his own store, but he can't find a suitable place at an affordable price. Everything is bought up by big companies." I nodded, making a mental note this could come in handy later. Contrary to their promises, my children were in no hurry to visit during my first 2 weeks in Quiet Harbor. G stopped by only once for 15 minutes, clearly in a hurry to get somewhere. Aubrey called, but always found a reason not to come. My grandchildren did show up at all. However, information gradually began to trickle in from my contacts. Rita was the first to call. "Iris, you were right. The report is full of inconsistencies. The wiring was new, and the source of the fire was in 2 different places at the same time. Plus, there are traces of an acceleranthe Inspector is either incompetent or was bribed. Thank you, Rita. Could you send him a copy of the report I've already sent it to your email? Be careful. Iriston came information from Marcus. He didn't call but sent an envelope with all the documents. Old school but reliable. I looked through the papers in my room, and with each page my suspicion turned into certainty. Gar had been trying to get power of attorney over my finances even before the fire. Aubrey had been inquiring about the terms of my insurance policy, and just recently the two of them had applied for the right dominage. The insurance payout due too. The incapacity of the mother, but the most interesting part was in the financial statements. Gar owed the bank a large sum for home renovations he had undertaken without sufficient funds. Aubrey and Jefford were deep in debt. Apparently his car business wasn't doing as well as he had boasted. Jenkins was the last tow call. I have something interesting, Mrs. Well. A week before the fire, your son-in-law, Ford Kensington, met with a man known for his arson services, and your daughter withdrew $2.00 in cash from her account on the same day. Are you sure? I have photos of the meeting and the account statement. I sent everything to Marcus. Thank you. Jenkins, I won't forget this. Don't mention it. I've always respected Mr. Vattel and you. I hung up and went back to my room so the picture was clear. My children, mired in debt, had decided to get rid of me and collect the insurance on the house. They might even have been planning to Southland after my death, which they believed would come soon. After I moved into the nursing home, many elderly people fade quickly when they are cut off from their familiar surroundings. But they didn't know two things. First, I had an intention of dying anytime soon. And second, the land on which my house ends there. Houses stood did not belong to me as an inheritance from Edward Madley, but as property of Vastal Properties, a company they didn't even know existed. I took a map of Maiorama out of my bag on which Logan had marked the neighborhood ship belonged to us. Marcus updated it regularly, noting new buildings and changes to the boundaries. My children's houses were in the very center of our property. G and Winona's house was large and luxurious, built on a plot of land they had paid a pittance for too. An unknown company, Aubrey and Zephyr's house, was smaller but in a prestigious location near the park, also on my land. I smiled, remembering how Logan always said, "Land, Iris, is the only thing of real value. Everything else is just buildings on it." Well, it was time to teach my children a lesson. I took out my notebook and began to make a plan. First, I needed to meet with Wobble's son, Fergus. If Hugh was really looking for a place for his shop, perhaps I could offer him the perfect option. The plot of land where my house used to stand there. 'Twas a knock at the door, and the evening caregiver entered with my pills. "Mrs. Well, you seem very absorbed in your writing," she remarked, handing me a glass of water. "Oh, just reminiscing," I smiled, hiding my notebook. You know, at my age, the past is sometimes more interesting than the present. In 3 weeks at Quiet Harbor, I had managed to learn all its nooks and crannies and unspoken rules. Here, as in any closed community, there was a hierarchy, cliques and ways to get what you wanted. Merce Fleming from room 200 for knew all the gossip. Mr. Barker from 210 secret. Liz McGauld in Whiskey and Nurse Nancy could arrange transportation to town without any questions if you asked Herat the right moment with the right bill. I sat in the garden with Webley, who had become my constant companion. He was arranging pieces on a chessboard, another habit that betrayed his orderly nature. "Is your son coming today?" Asked, making my first move. Wobble, nod, moving. "Upon every Wednesday after lunch. Fergus is as punctual as a Swiss watch. Tell me more about him," I said, moving my night. "You said he wants to open a shop." Webble's face lit up, as it always did when he talked about his son. "Yes, a farm shop. Fergus has always been close to Thieland, even though he didn't become a farmer like me. He organizes farmers markets and supplies vegetables and fruit to restaurants, but for the last 3 years he's been dreaming of his own shop, a permanent place. What's stopping him?" Land, Wobble-sided. "Large developers have bought up everything in Miramar. What's left is crazy expensive, and Fergus wants a shop in our neighborhood." "Why here? This is where our roots are. Our farm was 2 miles from here until it was bought up for residential development, and besides, it's the center off town now, a good place for business." I nodded and made my next move. "Maybe could help your son Webby looked at me and surprise you. How I smiled, telling me he'd like to talk to him when he gets here. Webby looked puzzled, but didn't ask any questions. Soon I had him checkmated, and he shook his head. You play like my late brother. You always thought 3 moves ahead to a useful skill, I remarked as I gathered the pieces after lunch. Returned to my room and looked over the documents Marcus had sent me again, in addition to financial statements. Detailing my children's debts there was something else. A draft construction plan for the lot where my house had stood. G and Aubreyette. Turned out had already consulted with an architect about building a small shopping center they planned to use. Find insurance money for initial financing, and then take out a loan secured by the land. That did not belong to them. There was a knock. At the door, standing on the threshold, was Wobbly with a middle-aged man who was unmistakably Hyacinth. The same piercing eyes and stubborn chin, only his hair was not. Yet Gramer Vattel. This is my son Fergus Wobble, introduced us Fergus. This is Mrs. Vattelwam I told you about. Very nice to meet you, Fergus. Shook my hand. His hand shook Sia's. Firm as you would expect from a man accustomed to physical labor. Likewise, I said, pointing to the chairs, please sit down. Webby said you were looking for a place. For a shop, Fergus nodded, looking at me with interest. Yes, for almost 3 years. Now, but the good locations are either already taken or too expensive light, if I told you. I had the perfect spot in a good location at a reasonable price. Fergus glanced at his father. I'm sorry, Mrs. Wellow, but I don't quite understand. Do you own real estate? Me house burned down 3 weeks ago. I said the lot is on Oak Street. Do you know the place? Fergus's eyes widened. Of course, that's downtown, right next to the park one. Of the best areas. You want to sell the lot? Maybe, I said, taking a map I had prepared in advance out of the drawer. This is where my house used to be. It's a great location for a store. There's a park. Nearby residential buildings, good traffic. Fergus looked at the map with poorly concealed excitement. It really is the perfect location, but it must be worth a fortune. I smiled. I let you in on a secret, Fergus. Money isn't as important to me as it used to be. It's much more important to me that me house is replaced with something useful to the community. Something I would like a farm shop. I named Opris, quite reasonable for the location, but still affordable for a startup business. Fergus looked as if he couldn't believe his ears. That's a very generous offer, Mrs. Wellow. But I have to ask, why are you offering this to me instead of putting the land up for sale? Good question. The guy's not stupid. Let's just say I like your idea, and besides, I nodded toward Wobble, your father speaks so proudly of you. I believe in family values, without specifying, of course, that my understanding of family values now included revenge on traitors. Fergus thought about it. I need to think. Abuthas offer talk to the bank about a loan. Of course, I nodded. But don't take too long. I have other offers. It was a lie, but a little pressure never hurt. I'll be in touch in a couple of days. Fergus promised, standing up. Thank you, Mrs. Welwyn. They left. I called Marcus. We may have a buyer for the land with my burned down house, I said. Get the paperwork ready and check to see if my children have taken any action regarding the land. We already have, Marcus said. Grimly, they've applied for a permit to build a commercial property. The application states that the land belongs to you and that they are acting on your behalf, but they don't have power of attorney. Exactly. I've already sent a request to the municipality regarding the illegality of their actions. But they're clearly in a hurry, Iris. Perhaps we should meet with them and clarify the situation. I thought about it. No, it's not time for an open confrontation yet. Let's not show our cards yet. Marcus, let them think their plan is working. Just block any attempts they make to dispose of my property. The next day, Fergus called me on the landline at Safe Haven. Mrs. Waysly, accept your offer. The bank is willing to give me a loan for the property. When can we meet to sign the papers? I'll have a lawyer contact you, I replied. His name is Marcus Fielding. He'll take care of everything. After that conversation, I sat down at my notebook again. The plan was beginning to take shape. Fergus would get the plot for his shop, the land on which my house stood, and my children, well, they would soon learn that their plans for commercial development would not come to fruition, but that wasn't enough. I wanted them to feel the full depth of their betrayal. I wanted them to understand that I wasn't just a helpless old woman who could be sent to a nursing home. And forgotten Nurse Nancy peeked into the room. Mrs. Wisdell, you have a visitor, your daughter Aubrey, that wasn't expected. I quickly hid my notebook and prepared myself for the encounter. Aubrey entered with a forced smile and a bouquet of flowers. She looked tense, as if being here was an ordeal for her mom. How are you? I'm sorry I didn't come sooner. We've had so much going on. Sit down, I said, pointing to the chair. What's so urgent? Aubrey hesitated a little, then said, G and I are working on insurance for the house, and also we're planning what to do with the land. Really? By feigned interest? What are you planning? We're thinking maybe building something there, a small shopping center or offices. The lot's in a good location. It would be a shame to just sell it. What about my house? Aren't you going to restore it? Aubrey hesitated. That wouldn't be practical. The house was old and had problems. It's better to build something new. You can live here. Like Quiet Harbor, don't you? I looked closely at my daughter. I could see the tension in her eyes. She was clearly afraid that I would object to their plans. Yes, it's nice here, I said. Finally, what does the insurance company say they're investigating? Standard procedure for large claims. I see, I nodded. When do you plan to start construction? As soon as we get the insurance, and the building permit has already found an architect and a contractor. Everything should be settled in the next few weeks. That sounds promising, I smiled. You've done a great job getting everything organized so quickly. Aubrey clearly wasn't expecting that reaction. She looked confused. But pleased you don't mind? Why would I mind? You're doing this for your family, you're right, of course. Mom, Aubrey nodded enthusiastically. It'll be a family business. We'll be able to support you here. And there will be something left for the children. Wonderful. I patted her hand. I'm glad I can count on you. After Aubrey left, I sat by the window for a long time, looking out at the garden. My daughter didn't even ask what I wanted to do with the property. She and G had already decided everything, as if the land belonged to them. They had already divided up the future income without considering that I was still alive and might have my own plans. Well, they would soon find out how wrong they were. The next day, Marcus informed me that the documents for the sale of the land to Fergus were ready. We arranged to meet on Monday at his office. I had to use NY Services to arrange transportation, supposedly to visit a Dr. Marcus' office was in an old building in the business district of Miramar. I hadn't been here in years, but nothing had changed. The same creaky floors, the same wood paneling on the walls, the same smell of old books and leather. Mother Marcus met me at the door despite his age, stood straight and looked impressive in his immaculate suit. Mrs. Well, he bowed slightly. I'm glad to see you in good health. Likewise, Marcus. I shook his dry hand. As our buyer here, yet he's waiting in my office. A nice young man, very serious about business. Fergus did indeed look serious and a little nervous. He stood up when we entered. Mrs. Vattel, I am so grateful for this opportunity. Don't mention it, I said, sitting down in the chair opposite him. I'm glad my property's going to a good home. Marcus laid out the documents in front of us and began to explain the terms of the deal. And noticed how carefully Fergus read every line and asked clarifying questions. It was a good sign. He was taking the matter seriously. When all the formalities were settled and the documents signed, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. The first step of my plan had been taken. Now Theplet officially belonged to Fergus, and my children's plans for commercial development could not be realized. I'll start the preparatory work next week, Fergus said, shaking my hand. Goodbye. You won't regret your decision. Mrs. Vattel Mishap will be the best in Miramar. I'm sure of it. I smiled when Fergus left. Marcus and I remained in the office. What now? He asked, pouring us each a glass of sherry, an old tradition after a successful deal. Now we have to prepare for my children's reaction, I said, taking the glass. They'll find out about the sale of the land soon, and they'll be furious. They may try to contest the deal. Marcus remarked, claim that you were incompetent or acting under duress. Let 'em try. I sipped the sherry, sweet and strong, just as it should be. They have no proof. Besides, this is just the beginning. The next step is the land under their homes. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You want to evict your own children? No, I shook my head. I want to teach them a lesson. They've forgotten who I am. They've forgotten what Logan taught me. I saw a shadow of concern in Marcus's eyes. He knew Logan knew how ruthless he could beto traitors, and perhaps he saw in my eyes now the same cold gleam that had once been in my first husband's eyes. Be careful, Iris, he said quietly. Revenge may bring satisfaction, but it rarely brings happiness. I'm not looking for happiness, Marcus, I replied, finishing my sherry. I'm looking for justice. When I returned to the quiet harbor, I found aerial commotion. The nurses were whispering and the residents were casting curious glances at me. Finally, Linda approached me with a worried look on her face. Well, your son is here. He's very upset and demands to see you immediately, so G already knew about the sale faster than I expected. Well, it wastes time to play the next move. Where is he? I asked calmly. In the visitor's room. Merce Spomer is with him. She's worried. Don't worry, I patted Linda on the arm. I'll handle it. Gar paced the visitor's room like a caged tiger when I entered. Has spun around, Mom. What have you done? You sold the property. Mrs. Palmer, the director of the retirement home, sat in the corner looking concerned. Mrs. Palmer, thank you for your concern, but I'd like to talk to my son alone, I said. She looked at Gar doubtfully but nodded and left, closing the door behind her. Sit down, G, I said, pointing to a chair. This fuss isn't good for you. Mom, do you even realize what you've done? You didn't sit down. We already got the building permit. We had plans investors in my land, I said calmly. Without my consent, we would have discussed everything. With you, we did it for the family, really. I looked at him closely. On the fire in my house was for the family too. G palted. What are you saying? Debt was an accident. We both know that's not true. I sat down in the chair, feeling something long forgotten awaken inside me. The cold calculation I had learned from Logan. Why hire an arsonist? Gar, why send him to a nursing home? This is crazy. Gar raised his voice, but I could see the panic in his eyes. You're out of your mind. Mom, I have proof I lied. Watching his reaction, there was no direct evidence, but his face betrayed the truth. And I sold the land to Fergus Holt because he's going to build some of things fall. They're a farm shop, not a shopping center that would pay off your debts. G sank into the chair across from me. His face was a mixture of fear and anger. You can't do this. Or your children. Children don't burn down their mother's house, I snapped. And what I did with the land is only the beginning. What do you mean? I smiled, feeling a strange satisfaction at his confusion. You'll find out in time. In the meantime, Telebri, I want to see you both tomorrow. We're going to have a serious talk about the land beneath your feet. I scheduled a meeting with the children for 3 o'clock in the afternoon in the common room of the quiet harbor. I arrived early to choose a comfortable spot, an armchair by the window with a view of the garden and a good view of the entire room. Logan always said never sit with your back to the door and always choose a seat with a good view. One of his many habits that I had picked up. Webley, who was passing by, stopped Iris. He had only recently started calling me by my first name. My son asked me to convey his heartfelt thanks to you. He has already begun preparing the paperwork for the construction. I'm glad to hear it, I smiled. I hope your son will invite us to the store opening. Well, be sure to. Webby nodded and suddenly lowered his voice. Are the kids coming over today? I heard your son caused a scene yesterday. News in Quiet Harbor spread faster than social media. Just a little misunderstanding, I replied calmly. Everything will be cleared up today. Garand Aubrey arrived together, right? On time. Aubrey looked worried. Gar, tense tummy, surprised. Winona and Zephyrod followed them, and the whole family was there. Mom Aubrey leaned down to kiss me on the cheek. She smelled of perfume and nervousness. We came as you asked. Sit down, I said, pointing to the sofa opposite. Would you like some tea? No thanks, G said curtly. We don't have much time. How convenient, I remarked. You don't have much time for your own mother button. That's nothing new. They exchanged glances. Winona broke the silence for stress. We're all concerned about what happened. Guy told us about selling the property, really? And what did he say? That you sold the land to some farmer? Zephyr interjected. Never one for tact without stung us. We're family, for God's sake, Zephyr, Aubrey warned. But I raised my hand. It's all right, let him speak. I appreciate honesty too. I said, looking straight at my brother-in-law. Yes, I sold the land to Fergus. Halt, he's going to open a farm shop there. It's my land, Andy. Have the right to do what I want with it. But we already got a building permit, G exclaimed. We had plans investors on my land. I said calmly, without my consent or even consulting me. I wonder how you got building permit? Another heavy silence and exchange of glances, Mom. Aubrey began in a conciliatory tone. We wanted to make you happy, to surprise you, to build something meaningful on the side of your house. It's a surprise. I repeated the word as if tasting it like a fire in my house. Was that a surprise too? Forfro Zephyr opened his mouth, but Aubrey put her hand on his knee, stopping him. It was an accident. G said in a wooden voice, a short circuit. Really? I leaned forward. What does the insurance company say? Why haven't they paid out yet? They're investigating, aren't they? Standard procedure. Winona said quickly, they always play it safe with large claims. Or they suspect arson. I remarked, that's absurd. Gar raised his voice. Do you think we set your house on fire? I didn't answer, just looked at him calmly. Face always gave him away. His right cheek twitched nervously when he lied, just like now. What nonsense, Zephyr muttered. We just wanted to help. You're better off here with professional care of course. I agreed, especially when your finances are in such a sorry state, with his home repair debt, Zephyr, with his failed deals and loans. Aubrey is forced to work double shifts to make ends meet. They looked at me with undisguised shock. How did I know about their financial problems? Could this old woman in a nursing home have conducted her own investigation? That's not true, Winona blurted out, but her voice trembled. Rita Saunders from the fire department is an old friend of mine. I continued, relishing their confusion. She showed me the fiery Bordeaux. Know what's interesting about it? Traces of an accelerant at 2 different points of origin and the fire alarm. Was Dizabald that could be a coincidence, G muttered, but without conviction, like Zephyr's meeting with ascertain individual a week before the fire, or Aubrey withdrawing $2. Zero in cash on the same day. Now they looked genuinely frightened. Zephyr even stood up as if to leave. But Aubrey stopped him again. Mom, she said pleadingly, we don't understand what you were talking about. I think you understand perfectly well. I sat leaning back in my chair, but that's not the point right now. I called you here to discuss something else, the land. What land? G asked with a nervous laugh. You already sold your property. The land your houses are on, I replied calmly. You know who it belongs to, don't you? Again, they exchanged glances, this time puzzled. Whale Properties, Winona. Satan, certainly, we pay them rent for the land. But what does that have to do with you? I smiled as I watched the confusion in their faces. Everything Vastal Properties is my company. The silence that followed was deafening. 4 pairs of eyes stared at me with varying degrees of disbelief and shock. That's impossible, G finally managed to say. The company's been around for 30 years. It's 34 to be exact. I corrected since Logan passed away. Logan, Aubrey asked, you mean? Your first husband, Botu, hardly ever talked about him because Edward, your father, had no need to know about him. I shrugged. Logan left me several blocks of land in the private sector of Miramar, including the ones where your houses are, Winona. Let out a nervous laugh. Is this some kind of joke, you mean? All these years we've been paying rent to you? Not exactly. You paid a token amount 10 times? Less than the market value. It was my gift to you. I could have given you the land for free, but Logan taught me that there's no such thing as a free lunch. People don't appreciate what they get for free. But why didn't you ever tell us? Aubrey looked shocked. All these years, Wisehold. I have, I shrugged. You lived your life, I lived mine. You paid minimal rent and were happy. I quietly managed my assets through trustees and was happy too. And now what? Asked. Gee, his face turning pale. Are you going to evict us? I haven't decided yet. I replied calmly, but starting tomorrow, new lease agreements will take effect. At market rates. What? Winona cried out. You can't do that. I can't. I will, I said, looking her straight in the eye. You tried to get rid of Mayo. Burned down my house. You sent me to a nursing home. You planned to take my property. Why should I continue To give you gifts. We didn't do any of that. She was almost shouting, but his right cheek twitched tellingly, speaking of gifts. I continued, ignoring his outburst. Zephyrty, here your business partner James is having trouble renting the store on Cedar Street. Zeph froze. How do you know about James? I have my sources. I shrugged. I'm sorry, but the lease won't be renewed. Fee building needs major repairs. Was that you? Zephyr jumped up. Are you behind fee? Sit down. I didn't raise my voice, but something in my tone made him sink back onto the sofa. Whale Properties owns most of the land in that area, including the lot under James's shop, and yes, I refused to renew the lease. Business is business, but this was personal, and they knew it. James was Zephyr's only partner. Woe still did business with him after a string of failed projects. Without this partnership, his car business would collapse completely. You can't do this to your own children, Aubrey blurted out. Where your family doesn't try to get rid of their old people, I snapped, and they don't set fire to their homes. Javi. Silence hung in the air. Finally, G spoke, his voice breaking. What do y'all want from us, Mom? The truth, for starters. I replied, admit what you've done. They exchanged glances. Zephyr twitched as if he were about to say something, but Winona stopped him. We can't admit something we didn't do, she said firmly. Then we're done talking. I said, standing up. The new leases take effect tomorrow. The rent is increasing tenfold in line with market value. You have 30 days to decide whether to pay or move out. You can't do that. Aubrey exclaims this is blackmail. No, dear. This is business. I smiled without warmth. A Skyer husband. He should understand. I turned to leave, but G grabbed my arm. Wait, what if we confess? G Winax claimed. Are you out of your mind? What choice do we have? He turned to her. Uz, what she's doing, she'll be better for everyone. You'd get good care, and we could solve her financial problems. Aubrey. Zephyr barked, but she couldn't stop herself. We all agreed. Zephyr found someone to set the fire so it would look like a short circuit. We knew you'd have time to get out. The house wasn't supposed to catch fire right away. Enough. I raised my hand. Insurance. Where's the money? It hasn't come in yet, G replied. The insurance company is investigating. They suspect arson because it was arson. I said dryly, all right, here's what you're going to do. Withdraw the insurance claim, return all documents related to the building permit, and pay full rent. Fourth, land under your houses that will ruin us. Winona whispered, you chose this path yourselves. I shrugged. You have an alternative. Move out and find another place to live. Perhaps something more affordable. You can't do this to your own family, Aubrey repeated, but without her previous confidence. You were the first to break the family ties. I replied, when you decided that an old mother was a burden to be gotten rid of. With that, I left the room, leaving them to digest their new reality. Wabi was waiting for me in the hallway. I could tell by the look on his face that he had heard at least part of his conversation. That was harsh, he remarked when we were out of earshot. They'd served it. I replied, they tried to get rid of me. Webby nodded. My father, who said to say he who digs a pit for others will fall into it himself. Your father was a wise man that evening, Mark huskled. Me, Iris, are you really going to increase the rent for your children tenfold? Yes, I replied. Get the paperwork ready. You do realize that they may not be able to afford such payments, especially now with their financial troubles. I do, I said, pausing, but they need to understand the consequences of their actions. If they admit their guilt, apologize, and return all the documents related to insurance and construction, I might reconsider the terms. Marcus sighed. You've always been to Iris, but fair. I learned from the best, I replied, and we both knew I meant Logan. The next day, Fergus came to visit his father and stopped by to see me with some news. His eyes were shining with excitement. Mrs. Well, the preliminary work has begun. We've done the surveying, and tomorrow we'll start clearing the site. In a month we'll start construction. That's wonderful, Fergus, I said, genuinely delighted. I hope your shop will be as you says. It's thanks to you that it's possible, he said, pausing. You know, I met some strange people on the site yesterday. They introduced themselves as your children and claimed that the land belonged to them. And what did you say? I showed them the notarized purchase documents. Fergus grinned. They didn't look happy, especially the tall man with thinning hair. That's my son G. I nodded. Don't pay any attention to them, the Landis. Officially yours, and no one can dispute that. I understand. Fergus stood up. Thanks again, Mrs. Well, I'll send you an invitation to the store opening, I promise, after he left. Took out my notebook and made a few notes. The plan was in motion. Fergus got the land for his store, and my kids were starting to realize how serious things were now. All that remained was to prepare the changes to the lease agreements and wait for their next move. I had no intention of evicting my children or ruining them, but they had to understand that their actions had consequences that you can't betray your own mother with impunity, and that the land beneath their feet, literally my land, could be taken away from them at any moment if they forgot that through a trusted courier. I sent each of my children new lease agreements with a tenfold increase in rent. Attached to the agreements was a short note that choice is yours, truth and repentance, or new terms you have 30 days in thieving. I sat by the window in my room watching the garden of Quiet Harbor. Elderly couples strolled among flower beds, nurses pushed wheelchairs, and somewhere the children of visitors laughed. It was a normal, peaceful scene, but inside me, there was no peace. Years of living with Logan had taught me a lot, and now those lessons came in handy. I skillfully used my knowledge of accounting and the law, my old connections, to make sure everything was legally watertight. I had been tightening the noose around my family's low, but surely giving them a chance to realize how serious their transgressions were. They had betrayed Metride to get rid of me. Now they were going to learn that I was not just a helpless old woman. I was Iris Vastaleligan Vestal's widow, and I knew how to respond to betrayal. I arranged to meet the children at 3 o'clock in the afternoon in common room of the Quiet Harbor. I arrived early to choose a comfortable spot. An armchair by the window with a view of the garden and a good view of the entire room. Logan always said, never sit with your back to the door and always choose a seat with a good view. It was one of his many habits that I had adopted. Webley, who was passing by, stopped Iris. He had only recently started calling me by my first name. My son asked me to convey his heartfelt gratitude to you. He has already begun preparing the documentation for the construction. I'm glad to hear it. I smiled. I hope your son will invite us to the store opening. Well, be sure to. Webby nodded and suddenly lowered his voice. Are the kids coming over today? I heard your son caused a scene yesterday. News in Quiet Harbor spread faster than on social media. Just a little misunderstanding, I replied calmly. Everything will be cleared up today. G and Aubrey arrived together right on time. Aubrey looked worried. G tends to miss a surprise. Winona and Zephyr followed them, and the whole family was their mom. Aubrey leaned down to kiss me on the cheek. She smelled of perfume and nervousness. We came as you asked. Sit down, I said, pointing to the sofa opposite. Would you like some tea? No thanks, G said curtly. We didn't have much time. How convenient, I remarked. You don't have much time for your own mother, but then that's nothing new. They exchanged glances. Winona broke the silence first. Iris, we're all concerned about what happened. G told us about selling the property. Really, and what did he say? That you sold the land to some farmer? Zephyr interjected, never own for tact. Without consulting us. We're family, for God's sake, Zephyr, Aubrey warned, but I raised my hand. It's all right, let him speak. I appreciate honesty too, I said, looking straight at my brother-in-law. Yes, I sold the land to Fergus. Halt, he's going to open a farm shop there. It's my land, and I have the right to do what I want with it, but we already got a building permit. Gex claimed we had plans. Investors on my land, I said calmly, without my consent. A Revan consulting me. I wonder how you got the building permit. Another heavy silence, an exchange of glances. Mom, Aubrey began in a conciliatory tone. We wanted to make you happy, to surprise you to build something meaningful on the site of your house. A surprise, I repeated the word as if tasting it like a fire in me house. Was that a surprise to all four froze? Zephyr opened his mouth, but Aubrey put her hand on his knee, stopping him. It was an accident, G said in a wooden voice. A short circuit, really. I leaned forward. What does the insurance company say? Why haven't they paid out yet? They're investigating, aren't they? Standard procedure. Winona said quickly, they always play it safe with large claims. Or they suspect arson, I remarked. How absurd, G raised his voice. Do you think we set your house on fire? I didn't answer, just looked at him calmly, his face always gave him away. His right cheek twitched nervously when he just like now. What nonsense. Zephord muttered, we just wanted to help you rabbit her off here with professional care, of course. I agreed, especially when your finances are in such a sorry state. Gar with his home repair debt, Zephord with his failed deals and loans, Aubrey is forced to work double shifts to make ends meet. They looked at me with undisguised shock. How did I know about their financial problems? Could this old woman in a nursing home conducted her own investigation? That's not true. Winona blurted out, but her voice trembled. Rita Zonders from the fire department is an old friend of mine. I continued, relishing their confusion. She showed me the fire report. You know what's interesting about it? Traces of an accelerant at 2 different points of origin, and the fire alarm was disabled. That could be a coincidence, G muttered, but without conviction, like Zephord's meeting with a certain individual a week before the fire, or Aubrey withdrawing $2,000 in cash on the same day. Now they looked genuinely frightened. Zephord even stood up as if to leave, but Aubrey stopped him again. Mom, she said pleadingly, we don't understand what you're talking about. I think you understand perfectly well. I sat leaning back in my chair, but that's not the point right now. I called you here to discuss something else. The land. What land? She asked with a nervous laugh. You already sold your property. The land your houses are on, I replied calmly. You know who it belongs to. Don't Yawagain. They exchanged glances this time. Puzzled. Whale properties, Winona Sadin, certainly. We pay them rent for the land, but what does that have to do with you? I smiled as I watched the confusion their faces. Everything Vastal Properties is my company, the silent Seethit. Followed was deafening. 4 pairs of eyes stared at me with varying degrees of disbelief and shock. That's impossible, Gar finally managed to say. The company's been around for 30 years, 34 to be exact, I corrected. Since Logan passed away. Logan, Aubrey asked. You mean your first husband, but you hardly ever talked about him because Edward, your father, had no need to know about him. I shrugged. Logan left me several blocks of land in the private sector of Miramar, including the ones where your house is. Winona let out a nervous laugh. Is this some kind of joke? You mean all these years we've been paying rent to you? Note exactly you paid? A token amount 10 times less than the market value. It was midge for you. I could have given you the land for free, but Logan taught me that there's no such thing as a free lunch. People don't appreciate what they get for free, but why didn't you ever tell us? Aubrey looked shocked. All these years, should I have? I shrugged. You lived your life, I lived mine. You paid minimal rent and were happy. I quietly managed my assets through trustees and was happy too. And now what? Asked G, his face turning pale. Are you going to evict us? I haven't decided yet, I replied calmly, but starting tomorrow, new lease. Agreements will take effect at market rates. What? Winona cried out. You can't do that. I can't. I will, I said, looking her straight in the eye. You tried to get rid of me. You burned down my house. You sent me to a nursing home. You planned to take my property. Why should I continue to give you gifts? We didn't do any of that, G was almost shouting, but his right cheek twitched, tellingly speaking of gifts, I continued, ignoring his outbursts. Zephord, I hear your business partner James is having trouble renting the store on Cedar Street. Zephord froze. How do you know about James? I have my sources. I shrugged. I'm sorry, but the lease won't be renewed. The building needs major repairs. Was that you? Zephyr jumped up. Are you behind this? Sit down. I didn't raise my voice, but something in my tone made him sink back onto the sofa. Whale Properties owns most of the land in that area, including the lot under James's shop, and yes, I refused to renew Thelly's business, but this was personal, and they knew it. James Washerford's only partner, who still did business with him after a string of failed projects. Without that partnership, his car business would be finished. You can't do this to your own children, Aubrey blurted out. We're your family. Doesn't try to get rid of their old people. I snapped or set fire to their homes. A heavy silence hung in the air. Finally, G spoke his voice. "Breaking, what do you want from us, Mom?" "The truth for starters," I replied. "Admit what you've done." They exchanged glances. Zephyr as if he was about to say something, but Winona stopped him. "We can't admit to something we didn't," Doshi said firmly. "Then this conversation is over," I said, standing up. "The new les agreements take effect. Tomorrow the rent is increasing tenfold, in line with market value. You have 30 days to decide with 30 to pay or move out." "You can't do that," Aubrey exclaimed this. Is blackmail?" "No, dear, this is business." I smiled without warmth. "Ask your husband should understand." I turned to leave. But G grabbed my arm. "Wait, what if? "We confess, G," Winona exclaimed. "Are you out of your mind? What choice do we have, E?" "Turn to her. You see what she's doing. She's going to ruin us. Confessing is only the beginning." I said, pulling my hand free. "I need the whole truth. Who came up with the plan? Who carried it out? And where's my insurance?" Silence again. Then Aubrey suddenly sobbed. "It was Zephyr's idea," she blurted out. "He said it would be better for everyone. You'd get good careened. We could solve our financial problems." Aubrey Zephyr barked. But Shekel didn't stop herself. We all agreed Zephyr found someone to set the fire, so it would look like a short circuit. You'd get out in time. The house wasn't supposed to catch fire right away. Enough. I raised my hand. "Insurance wares?" "The money, it hasn't come in yet," G replied. "The insurance company is investigating. They suspect arson because it was arson." I said dryly, "All right, there's what you're going to do. Withdraw the insurance claim, return all the documents related to the building permit, and you'll pay full rent for the land under your houses. That will ruin you." As Weena whispered, "You chose this path yourselves." I shrugged. "If you have an alternative, move out and find Anotherplis to live, perhaps something more affordable." "You can't do this to your own family," Aubrey repeated, but without her previous confidence. "You were the first to break the family ties," I replied, "when you decided that an old mother was a burden to be gotten rid of. With that, I left the room, leaving them to digest their new reality. Wabi was waiting for me in the hallway. I could tell from his face that he had heard at least part of conversation that was harsh. He remarked when we were out of earshot, "They deserved it." I replied, "They tried to get rid of me." Webby nodded. "My father used to say, 'He who digs a pit for others will fall into it himself.'" "Your father was a wise man that evening." Marcus called me Iris. "Are you really going to increase the rent for your children?" "Tenfold, yes," I replied. "Get Thepapor work ready. You do realize that they may not be able to afford such payments patiently now with their financial problems?" "I do," I said, pausing, "but they need to understand the consequences of their actions. If they admit their guilt, apologize, and return all the documents related to insurance and construction, I might reconsider the terms." Marcus sighed. "You've always been tough, Iris, but fair." "I learned from the best," I replied, and we both knew I meant Logan. The next day, Fergus came to visit his father and stopped by to see me with some news. His eyes were shining with excitement. "Mrs. Will's preliminary work has begun. We've done the surveying, and tomorrow we'll start clearing the site. In a month, we'll start construction." "That's wonderful, Fergus," I said, genuinely delighted. "I hope your shop will be a success. It's thanks to you that it's possible." He said, posing, "You know, I met some strange people on the site yesterday. They introduced themselves as your children and claimed the land belonged to them. And what did you say?" I showed them the notarized documents. Fergus grinned. They didn't look happy, especially the Talman with thinning hair. "That's my son G." I nodded. "Don't pay any attention to them. Land is officially yours, and no one can dispute that. I understand." Fergus stood up. "Thanks again, Mrs. Wellow. I'll send you an invitation to the store opening." I promise. After he left, I took out my notebook and made a few notes. The plan was in motion. Fergus got the land for his store, and my kids were starting to realize how serious things were. Now all that remained was to prepare the changes to the lease agreements and wait for their next move. I had no intention of evicting my children or ruining them, but they had to understand that their actions had consequences, that you can't betray your own mother with impunity, and that The land beneath their feet, literally my land, could be taken away from them at any moment if they forgot it. Through a trusted courier, I sent each of my children new lease agreements with a tenfold increase in rent. Attached to the agreements was a short note. The choice is yours, truth and repentance, or new terms. You have 30 days. In the evening, I sat by the window. In my room, watching the garden of Quiet Harbor, elderly couples strolled among the flower beds, nurses pushed wheelchairs somewhere. The children of visitors laughed, a normal, peaceful scene. My phone vibrated. A message from Marcus: all documents have been sent, keep posted. I put my phone away and continued looking out the window. Somewhere out there in their homes, my children were opening envelopes with new contracts. I wondered whose face would contort more. Geez, Orsiford's 2 weeks had passed since our conversation, and my children had vanished. No calls, no visits. Marcus Safety had hired a lawyer to look over the lease agreements and find loopholes. It was a waste of money. Logan had always been meticulous about legal matters, and I had inherited that trait. I sat in the garden of Quiet Harbor with Wobbly, watching his son Fergus show us photos of the construction site where my house had burned down. The clearing is almost done, he said enthusiastically. Next week we'll start laying the foundation. The architect has come up with an interesting concept: a shop with an open area for seasonal farmers markets. Sounds wonderful, I smiled. Leafing through the photos. Who are those people in the background? Fergus glanced at the photo and frowned. Your forecast. Your relatives Agan. They came yesterday and tried to stop the work. They claimed they had some kind of rights to the land. And what did you tell them? That I have all the necessary documents certified by a notary, and if they don't leave private property, I'll call the police. Fergus shrugged. They left, but promised to come back with a lawyer. Don't worry about it, I said, handing him back the photos. They can't do anything. The land officially belongs to you. When Fergus left, Wobbly looked at me thoughtfully. Your kids don't give up, do they? They're stubborn. I agreed, but I know how to deal with it. What are you up to, Iris? The final act. I smiled. It's time to dough the I's and cross the T's. That evening, I called Hart. He answered at the 5th ring, his voice sounding wary. Mom. Hello, Hart. I want to meet with the whole family on Sunday at 3 o'clock here at the Quiet Harbor. It's about your future, Rue. We've already hired a lawyer, he began. He says these new contracts are completely legal. I finished for him. And you know that come on Sunday, the Halefamily, and don't be late. I hung up without waiting for his answer and dialed Marcus. I need all the documents by Sunday. I said the property deeds, the land maps, the historical records, everything. Are you planning a final performance? Exactly. Marcus's voice was tinged with amusement. And find out about the financial situation of Zephyr's partner, James Norton. I need to know how badly theft or closure will affect him. Why do you need that? I have a plan by Sunday. I was completely ready. Marcus sent all the necessary documents by courier. I studied them carefully and arranged them in a specific order. Webley helped me book a small conference room at the Quiet Harbor, a more formal place than Thikimon room. By 3 o'clock, I was sitting at the table with a neat stack of papers in front of me. I was wearing a strict dark blue suit, not one of those tasteless new ones the kids had bought, but my own, which I had asked Nancy to bring from storage. Logan always said that the right clothes were half the battle in negotiations. They arrived at 3 sharps, whole family: G and Winona, Aubrey and Zephyr. Even the grandchildren, Arlon Thornton, all with equally tense expressions. For the first time I noticed much Thornton looked like Logan. The same sharp features, the same mannerous messonetics are a funny thing. Please have a seat, I said, pointing to the chairs surround the table. Thank you for coming. We didn't have much choices, Zephyr muttered, but Aubrey pulled him back. Mom, we want to talk about the new lease agreements, she began in a conciliatory tone. Those terms are impossible. We can't pay that kind of money. We'll talk about that too. I nodded, but first I want to clarify the situation and dot all the I's and cross all the T's. I opened the folder and took out the first document, the fire inspection report. Let's start with what happened on my 81st birthday. The fire in me house was not an accident. It was arson organized by you to collect insurance. It's money and get rid of me, Mom. That's an accusation, G began. But I raised my hand to stop him. Don't interrupt me. I have a fire department report. With evidence of arson, I have witnessed testimony about Zephyr meeting with a known arsonist a week before the fire. I have Aubrey's bank statement showing a large cash withdrawal on Thessum Day, and I have a recording of a conversation in this very room 2 weeks ago where you essentially confessed to your actions. I placed the tape recorder in front of them. They stared at it as I were a snake ready to strike. That's illegal. Zephyr managed to say, you can't record people without their consent. There are notices at the Quiet Harbor stating that the premises are under audio and video surveillance. I smiled for the safety of the residents. Of course, you signed a consent form when you entered it. Was a lie, but they couldn't verify it. What do you want from us, Mom? Aubrey asked quietly. Why are you doing this justice? I looked her straight in the eye. You tried to get rid of May. No. Put me in a nursing home hoping I would quietly fade away while you disposed of my money and property. That's not true, Winona exclaimed. We wanted you to be cared for by professionals. You burned down my house. I shook my head. Don't lie to me. Winona, you're all in debt and decided that an elderly mother was too much of a burden. The insurance on the house and the land underneath seemed like an easy solution to your problems. I took out the next document, a map of Vasil Properties land holdings in my Dormar. Now let's talk about the land, I said, spreading the map out on the table. This is Bavastal Properties, a company founded by my first husband, Logan Vestel, after Hedid. I inherited everything several blocks in the private sector of Miramar, including the land under your homes. I circled the areas where G and Aubrey's houses stood with a red marker. All this time you've been living on my land, paying a symbolic rent. It was my gift to you. Why didn't you ever tell us, G? Asked Doll. These years, should you have? I shrugged. It's my personal business. Besides, Edwards, your father, never knew about my connection to Vastal Properties. It's a remnant of my past life. I've obtained new les agreements. Under these agreements, you are being offered the market value for the land under your homes. That's 10 times what you've been paying according to legal counsel. You have no grounds to dispute these terms. Your lawyer has probably already informed you of this. They were silent, digesting the information. Finally, Marlo, my granddaughter, who had been sitting silently until then, spoke up. Grandma, are you going to evict us? Her voice trembled with genuine fear. I looked at her closely. She had always been aloof, immersed in her phone. Now sitting in front of me was a frightened young woman who was afraid of losing the roof over her head here. We are at the main issue. I leaned back in my chair. What I'm going to do with you? I paused deliberately, watching their reactions. Gar drummed his fingers nervously on Thedable when Ona pressed her lips tightly together. Aubrey looked like she was about to burst into tears. Zephyr stared out the window, avoiding my gaze. My grandchildren froze in tense anticipation. As you already know, I sold land with my burn-down house to Fergus Halt for the construction of a farm-to-table restaurant. The deal is already finalized, and no legal maneuvering can reverse it. I took out the photos of the construction site that Fergus had shown me. Work is in full swing. Construction of the store will begin next month. This was our chance. He muttered. We could have built a shopping center and solved your financial problems. I finished for him with my land and insurance money. It won't work. I placed the next document on the table, the denial of insurance payment. I've already contacted the insurance company and informed them of the arson suspicion. The investigation is ongoing, and if arson is proven, the case will be handed over to the police. You won't be getting any insurance money. You can't do that, Ford shouted. This is completely legal. I interrupted him. And you know that. I took out the last document, the deed to the land under their houses. As for your houses, I paused, watching them lean forward, waiting for the verdict. I didn't want your houses. You can have them. The land they stand on is mine. They looked at each other, not understanding what this meant. You can keep your houses, I explained, but you will pay the full market value for the land they stand on, or you can buy it at the current market price. You can find the funds, but that will ruin us, Winona exclaimed. We can't pay that kind of money. All have to learn to live within your means. I shrugged. Sell your expensive cars, cut back on your expenses, or find cheaper Housing the choice is yours. You can't do this to your own family. Blurt it out, we're your. Children, don't try to get rid of their parents by burning down their homes. I snapped. You betrayed me now. Pay for your betrayal. There was a heavy silence then unexpectedly. Thornton, my grandson, spoke up. Grandma, what about our children, your great-grandchildren? Do they have to pay? To the question caught me off guard. I hadn't thought about my great-grandchildren. Thornton had a 5-year-old daughter, and Marlowe had a 3-year-old son. They're not to blame. Thornton continued, this is our fault, not theirs. It looked at him closely. Maybe not everyone in this family was. Hopeless, all right? In nodded after a pause. I have a proposal. I'm willing to ease the terms if you agree to a few conditions. Every one will listen intently first. You will formally admit your guilt in the arson and bring me a written apology. Second, you will waive any claims to the insurance money and the land sold to Fergus. Third, Zephyr and Aubrey will visit him weekly at the quiet harbor, and G and Winona will pay for my stay here. And what do we get in return? G asked cautiously. A reduction in rent. To an acceptable level, not the ridiculous minimum you're paying now, but not the market maximum either. Something in between that you can manage with reasonable economizing, and I won't turn your confession over to the police. They looked at each other. Again, this time with hope, and one more thing I added. James Norton, Zephyr's partner. His shop is on Cedar Street. What about him, Zephyr? Asked warily. I'll reconsider no wing his lease if he agrees to a small rent increase, not to market rates. But 20% he can stay. Zephyr visibly relaxed. Thank you, he said. James is a good man. He doesn't deserve to be ruined because of me. At least you understand that? I remarked, now you know my terms. Make your decision. They didn't take long to consult. They had no choice really. Gas, the eldest, spoke for everyone. We agree to your terms. And we're really sorry about what happened. It was a terrible mistake. Not a mistake. I corrected a crime and treason. But I'll give you a chance to make amends. One and only one. I stood up, gathering my documents. Marcus will contact you tomorrow to finalize the paperwork. Now I'd like you to leave. I need to rest thee. Stood up, still stunned. Aubrey took a step toward me as if to hug me, but stopped when she saw my face. Mom, we're really sorry. She said quietly, I know it's hard for you to believe us right now, but we'll try to earn your forgiveness. We'll see. I replied, actions speak louder than words. When they left, I was alone in the conference room. The sun was setting outside, painting the quiet harbor garden in golden hues. I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. Not gloating no more, like a sense off balance, restored justice. There was a knock at the door and Webby entered. Well, did everything go according to plan? He asked, sitting down opposite me. More or less. I nodded. They agreed tummy terms. And what are those terms? I told him about our agreement. Webby huckled, tough but fair. They deserved a good lesson. I hope they learn it, Don. You feel sorry for them. They are your children, after all. I wondered if there was any maternal love left in me for these people who had planned to get rid of me. Perhaps there was, but it didn't outweigh the pain of their betrayal. I'll feel sorry for their children, my great-grandchildren, I replied honestly. They're not to blame, but G and Aubrey. They mad of their choice now. They'll have to live with the consequences. What are you going to? Dano asked. Wobbly, are you going to stay here for now? Yes, I said, looking out through window at the garden where elderly people were strolling leisurely in the evening light. You know, I actually like it here. It's peaceful, and I can help Fergus with his shop. I have some experience in business. He'll be happy. Webby smiled. Fergus respects you very much. He says you remind him of his grandmother, just as determined and perceptive. That's a nice compliment. I smiled, especially for a woman my age. We were silent for a moment, watching the sun go down. Then Wobby asked, what about your first husband, Logan? Would he have approved of what you did? I thought about it. Logan was a tough man who didn't forgive betrayal, but he also valued family in his own way. He would have thought I was weak for offering them a compromise, I replied honestly. Logan believed in absolute power and control, but I'm not Logan, and I never was, and that's good. Wobbly remarked, otherwise you wouldn't have offered Fergus the land for his store. Maybe. I smiled. You know, at my age, you start to realize that revenge is a waste. Of energy, it's more important to create something new, like a farm-to-table store, for example, and a new life. Even if you're 81 years old, we sat there on tile disc, talking about the past and the future. About Wobble's farm, Fergus's plans for the store. My life with Logan and Edward. The next morning, Marcus called. The papers are ready. He said, your children are coming to sign them this afternoon. They looked resigned. They just realized they had no choice. I replied, no one likes to lose, especially when they thought they had one from the start. What now? Marcus asked. What are your plans? Move on, Kay said, looking out the window where workers were already preparing the lawn for spring planting. Help Fergus with the store, maybe invest in other local businesses. I like creating something useful. You've always been a builder, not a destroyer, Iris, Marcus remarked, even when I worked with Logan. Funny. I smiled. Logan thought I was too soft, and now my kids think I'm a ruthless old woman. Who are you really? I wondered. Just a woman who knows Thevalu of the ground beneath her feet and the price of betrayal. A week later, I visited the construction site of Fergus's future store. A concrete pad for the foundation had already been poured where my burned downhouse once stood. Workers were setting up formwork, and Fergus was discussing construction details with the architect, Mrs. Walfergus. Beamed when he saw me. I'm so glad you came. I couldn't miss such an important stage, I said, looking around. Impressive. When are you planning to open? If everything goes according to plan, in 3 months, just in time for the summer season. We walked around the site discussing the layout and design. I furred a few ideas which Fergus immediately jotted down. You know more about business than many professionals I've worked with, he remarked respectfully. I had a good teacher, I replied, and many years of practice on me way back to the quiet harbor. I thought about how strange my life had turned out. My own children had betrayed him, tried to get rid of me, and a complete stranger, the son of a neighbor in a nursing home, had given me a new purpose in life. A new project. Life doesn't end at 81 sometimes. At that age, it's just beginning to take on new meaning. Even IFIT means going through betrayal and fire. I knew that. My children would now walk on thin ice, afraid of provoking my anger. They would come to Quiet Harbor with forced smiles, fulfilling the terms of our agreement. Not out of love, but out of fear. Fear of what I might still do, what leverage I still had over them. They were right to be afraid, because I really could have done a lot more. The land beneath their feet still belonged to me, and I intended to remind them of that at every opportunity, but now I had more important things to do. Ferguson's shop, new acquaintances in Quiet Harbor, possible investments in local businesses. Life went on, and I was going to live, eat in my own terms until the very end. As Logan said, land is the only thing a for all value. Everything else is just buildings on it. And I intended to leave me mark on this land, even if it meant burning a few bridges and